This is a Going Back interview, remembering the University of Georgia with Mr. Tom Johnson. I'm Tom Jackson. It's March 22nd, 2010. We're in Mr. Johnson's home in Atlanta. Mr. Johnson, thank you for having us in your home today. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Tom. I'm delighted to be with you.
Let's start at the beginning. Let's start in Macon in your early days, and tell us a bit about growing up in Macon, your family, and what your early childhood years were like.
Well, I was born September 30, 1941 in Macon. It was a much delayed, but I think also a much awaited moment in my mother's life. She was in her mid-30s at the time, having tried unsuccessfully to have a child earlier. And actually the doctors had said to her that there's no chance that you'll be able to become pregnant, but she did. And I came into the world, and I am the only child of Josephine Brown Johnson and Wyatt Johnson. My mother worked as a clerk in a very small grocery store, 6 days a week. My dad was a sort of a happy-go-lucky guy who held all type of odd jobs, among them selling watermelons out of his red International pickup truck during the summers, and selling wood out of his truck during the winters. And I recall some of my youngest memories were working with him on that truck. It was 25 cents for each watermelon, or 5 for $1, or 25 cents for a number 2 galvanized tub of wood, or 5 tubs for $1. I mean, I'll never forget it. And but my mother had a high school education and so wanted to go to college. Her father, like many fathers at the time, didn't think that girls should go to college, so he wouldn't fund her education to college. My dad had a 3rd grade education, but was a terrifically spirited person. I was influenced by those two people enormously. My mother, throughout my young years, was always saying to me, "Tommy, if you work hard and do right, you can accomplish anything you want to accomplish in life." She must have told me that dozens of times. And I actually came to a point where I believed it, that if I worked hard and did right. I regret she didn't also say to me that I should learn to play, because play was not much a part of my life. My dad also set an example for me. He was not responsible. He was a wonderful person in so many ways, but he was somewhat irresponsible. Mm-hmm. That influenced me, that I was going to be very responsible in my life, and that I was going to take care of my mother and take care of my family when I got to that point. So it's amazing, I think, as I look back, the influence at the very, very early years of those two parents on my life.
Selling watermelons and selling wood off the back of a truck must have been hard work. It must have made you appreciate what it took to earn a quarter.
It did. I didn't consider it hard work, though. I mean, I interestingly enough, in a lifetime, I've never had a job I didn't love, starting with the work that I did on that, as I said, that red International pickup truck.
Saying you found a way to make some money stringing for the Macon Telegraph.
Well,
tell us about that.
That was probably the next passage. I'd gone to Alexander II public schools in Macon. I went to Lanier Junior High for boys and Lanier Senior High, but it was really clear to me by the 9th grade that I needed to get a job. And I needed to get a job so I could help to defray some of my own expenses, but I also could help sort of lighten the load that my mother was carrying. And in the 9th grade at Lanier Junior High, there was an announcement by the English teacher that the Macon paper had an opening for a high school sports stringer to just bring in the high school sports scores. The first person who went down to apply for it was told about how much work went with it and decided not to do it. The second person who was recommended for the position went down to see the sports editor, Sam Glassman, and was told how much work was involved in it and didn't do it. I was the third choice, and I went down and talked to Sam Glassman, then the sports editor, and I just knew this was what I wanted to do. I mean, it was like I just connected with him and then with the people in that newsroom who I think to some extent almost treated me like one of their own. I mean, they knew that my mother would come down and pick me up in the evenings after she got off from work and after sometimes at 11 o'clock at night to get home because I couldn't drive at that point. But I just fell in love with that newsroom, with those people in that newsroom, with covering sports, and I did it of course during all the way through high school, up through the 12th grade, full time in the summers. And the more I did it, the more training they provided me, and the more enthusiasm I developed for journalism.
What do you think it was about that newsroom and about those people that so inoculated you with Printers Inc. and made you want to go into that business?
They love their work. Each day was a new day. Something new and different was happening every day. And they had been in and around it for a long time. I mean, in most cases, these were, in some cases, crusty news people. After Sam Glassman came Harley Bowers, and actually Harley inherited me from Sam. I was working on the desk there with a young guy named then Mose Walburn, who later was named Lee Walburn, who went on to a lot of heights, including editing the Atlanta magazine and much more. But they also took a lot of time. I mean, Sam Glassman taught me how to hunt and peck type with a real typewriter. He taught me how to do the official score books for both the Macon Peaches, owned by the Milwaukee Braves, and in the summer to get a job with the Little League as covering the Little League teams and being the official scorekeeper. And I was paid extra when I was the official scorekeeper. I got $7.50 extra for being the scorekeeper. But it was an incredible opportunity. It also taught me something then that has been with me my whole life. Sam Glassman said, "Tommy, the most important thing I can teach you is to get it right." 3 words, get it right. Mm-hmm. And whether I have been the editor of the Dallas newspaper and the publisher of the Dallas paper or the president of the LA Times or the publisher of the LA Times or head at CNN, I think, and I've said it to so many of my reporters and editors, that our fundamental need is to get the story right.
You had time somehow at Lanier High to also edit the high school paper.
Yes.
How'd you get into that?
Yeah. Well, I after my earliest experience in the Macon newsroom, it was a natural to want to be involved with the then Lanier High poet leader. It was just a natural, and I must tell you that I had been taught so much in the newsroom at the Macon Telegraph about writing headlines, about editing copy, the importance of sort of the fundamentals that the Associated Press and the Macon paper used as their style at the time, the importance of the who, what, when, where, why, on it, and just straight news reporting. That in many ways I was very well prepared to edit that high school newspaper, and it won all kind of awards. And also I found many other students who loved doing it as well.
And you began becoming involved at the state level with the Georgia Scholastic Press Association, became an officer there.
Yes.
You had such a crowd around you there at the Macon Telegraph, I wondered if you met other people around the state of Georgia at that time.
I did. frequently I was able to go out covering other teams, sports teams, either riding the bus with the Lanier players in football, basketball, and baseball and coming back, or in the summers, they had me start working more on the news desk, originally writing obituaries, but then doing general assignments. And there was a state news editor named George Landry, and I frequently went with George on assignments to cover different events as his gopher. And so I met politicians around, and I met just different people. And that's the other part of journalism to me, with the fascinating people you meet, that you interview, the access that it gives you. And I thought a lot about that, whether I was interviewing some judge in Macon or the mayor in Macon, like Ronnie Thompson, I believe, but also later when I had a chance to sit down with Mikhail Gorbachev or Boris Yeltsin or the then head of the People's Republic of China. I mean, it's just the ability to pull information out, get to know people, and I found that no matter where you travel, the best question that you can ask another person, particularly if you've never met them, and this is even true when I've sat down by people at the White House. It took me a long time to figure it out, but the best question that you can ask is one that I learned very early at Macon. Tom, tell me about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's able to talk about themselves, that's
for
sure.
But not, what do you do?
Yes.
Tom, tell me about yourself. And I can assure you that in 99% of the cases, you can get people to start talking.
That's great. So a lot of those people, early people, were influential on you.
They were the most influential.
But I guess none more so than Mr. Peyton Anderson.
None more than Peyton Anderson.
Tell me about your acquaintance with him, how you came to know him, and what role he grew to in your life.
Well, another University of Georgia graduate who wore his Phi Beta Kappa key with pride was Bill Ott, William A. Ott. Bill was the managing editor, and then he became the editor of the Macon paper. Bill took a lot of interest in just sort of watching me. I didn't report directly to him. I was reporting to Sam Glassman, to Harley Bowers, then to the news desk, and then to Jim Chapman, the managing editor. But at some point, Bill just noticed that I guess that I had promise, that I had potential. He also knew that I had, I don't want to say less than zero money, but that I had, that I needed to work to have an income in high school and in college, and particularly needed to work. And he introduced me to Peyton. Peyton was the person he reported to Peyton. The editor of the paper reported to the publisher. And I'm convinced that it was Bill Ott that really influenced Peyton to take the type of interest in me that he did. And there just came a time when they asked me what were my plans about college. And as I recall, I said I hoped to go to college. I wanted to go to college, but I really needed most of all to continue to work. And at some point, I was called over into Peyton Anderson's publisher's office on Cherry Street then in downtown Macon. And he said to me that if I could be admitted to the University of Georgia, that they would pay my way, provided I continued to work. And I needed to work. So that led to a lot of commuting between Athens and Macon during my college years. Not every day, but I tried to get in enough hours so I could get a 40-hour week. And that meant most weekends to do it. Didn't always make them, obviously, but the weekends was when they needed me the most. And that's also the time that I had the ability to get away from campus most. But sometimes I would go down on Thursdays. Anyway, Peyton Anderson became a devoted champion of mine. And I've really tried to, in every way that I can, remember what it was like for a person of means, a person of resources, to be able to reach out to a person who has no resources.
He followed you all the way through, did he not?
He did.
So you left Lanier High and you went off to Athens. I guess that was the fall of '59.
Yes.
What do you remember coming into campus? Your early impressions of arriving at the University of Georgia?
Fortunately, I had been on campus a few times with the Georgia Scholastic Press Association, and I had been to Athens, I think, for one or two conventions where I went. Georgia Press Association, I believe. But sure, I remember it really well. I remember my roommate at Reed Hall was a guy named John Tallberg, who my influence on him, I guess, was so great that he went on to become a priest. But he was an Argonaut and my roommate and a terrific person. But I also just remembered, really enjoying the Grady School of Journalism, Grady College now. But I enjoyed the classes. I especially enjoyed just the interest that the professors of that era took in me, from Dan Kitchens to Charlie Kopp to Dean Drury. And because I was there on scholarship, and because there had been a wonderful letter written by Bill Ott on behalf of the newspaper, I think I may have gotten a little bit more attention from some of the faculty members than some of the others. But as soon as I could, I got on the staff of the Red and Black.
What were college students like in '59 and '60?
The girls wore Bass Weegens. The guys were much more neatly dressed than today in almost every case. I had done ROTC and had become a cadet captain at Lanier High for boys, but I also joined the ROTC program because the ROTC program also paid you something like $15 a month or something. I think but it was I became involved in that. So I mean, often I was in an ROTC uniform, Army ROTC uniform. I didn't pledge a fraternity my freshman year, which is probably a good thing because I focused a great deal on my classes at the Grady College and outside of the Grady College, of course, with English and history and political science. The university was all white. It was great mixture of people from mostly from the state. It seemed like there were overwhelmingly in-state students at the time.
The all-white part changed while you were there.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about your memories of the desegregation of the university. It happened, I guess you were on the Red and Black. The paper was covering this.
I was on the Red and Black. I was covering the desegregation of the university. I was covering both for the Red Black and for the Macon paper. And as a result of the way in which the Macon paper had a relationship with the Associated Press, some of my copy made it onto that. But the very fact the Macon paper entrusted me to report that important story rather than sending in other more senior reporters was, I thought, pretty powerful. And they played my stories out front. And of course, on the Red and Black, I mean, in fact, I was just looking at them. I have copies of them here. I was out front with my coverage as the lead reporter almost throughout that. It left me with some memories I'll never forget. I was part of the press pack, I guess, that was near the arches as Charlene Hunter Galt, and Hamilton Homes walk through the arches on their very first entrance. That's where I got to know my friend Vernon Jordan. He was one of those who accompanied her.
What was your view of the campus's mood during that time and the way the state and the university approached that?
I mean, it's like I will never forget, because I would hear the shouts from the white students and look over and see friends of mine, people I knew well, who were shouting, 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't going to integrate. And far more far more serious words of hate. As we were walking along, and I was about as close to Charlene as I am to you, a young white student, I guess he was a student, I mean, I was assuming he was a student, but tried to spit on her, and the spittle did not hit her, but it hit the arm of one of the security people right in front of me, and here I am, I'd never experienced that in Macon. I'd never experienced it anywhere. Either that evening or the following evening, I was in front of her dormitory, Meyer Hall, covering it. Angry group of students out front. And out of the crowd comes a guy with either a brick or whatever, and it threw it at her dorm. I guess he was trying to throw it at her window, maybe. But I knew him. I named him. I mean, I can't say he was an acquaintance of mine. I spoke to some of the girls in the dormitory who were in the dormitory area where Charlene was to live. And I will never forget that they told several of us reporters, and again, because I'm a student, I probably was like, and many people knew me by then, I was able to get access that maybe a lot of the New York reporters, Atlanta reporters weren't able to get, but I'll never forget one had said that, Charlene, we are so glad to have you here. Honey, I think my exact quote, honey, we are so glad to have you here. We've needed a maid to clean up this place, these halls, for a long time. And I just thought about what a hurtful thing. That led me to invite Charlene to come down to work, because I knew she had an interest in journalism, to work on the Red and Black. And I'm not sure I've ever told this before. Maybe I have. But with the exception of maybe 3 or 4 of the staffers, she was mistreated by the Red and Black staffers, young journalists. I mean, they just weren't friendly. There were a couple big exceptions. I'll never forget Marcia Powell. Now, that name just has popped up now. Was a great friend of her on the staff. And there were a few others but I've thought of all things, here we are, a young group of young journalists, and here's a woman who wants to be a journalist, and we weren't nice to her. And that's one of my great regrets.
Well, she went on to become a fine journalist as well.
She did, including working at one point with me at CNN.
Those years did pass, and you were at UGA up until '63. Let's talk about other parts of your life there. You said you pledged a fraternity. You went to Sigma Nu.
I pledged Sigma Nu. Sigma Nu became, since I had no brothers, no sisters, and Sigma Nu became my family. I love Sigma Nu. I love the Sigma Nu house. We were made up mostly of South Georgians, and they were my kind of guys. I was fortunate to be elected president of called Commander of Sigma Nu, and then National Man of the Year of Sigma Nu, and got many, many other honors. But I'm telling you, it was like my family, good and bad. I mean, I had the same wonderful roommate all the way through, Don Roundtree, who was a journalism student. I tried my best. They owned a newspaper down in Dawson. I tried my best to convince Don to make a career out of journalism. He worked at the Make a Paper a couple of summers with me, but I think getting an extra $25 a week from the Chamber of Commerce and then later from an executive search firm took him to another world. And so I was not able to keep him in it. After my junior year, more and more people have been saying to me, including my faculty advisors, Dan Kitchens and others, that you really need a graduate degree in these days, that if you can. So I started applying for scholarships. I applied for the Grantland Rice Scholarship at Vanderbilt because Grantland Rice had been sort of the ultimate sports writer of that era and earlier. And I applied for a wonderful scholarship and won it to the University of North Carolina of Chapel Hill. I was so proud. I went down to Macon and asked for an appointment with Peyton Anderson. This is like the spring now of my senior year. I said, Mr. Anderson, I've won this scholarship at the University of North Carolina. I get a master's degree in journalism. Everybody tells me that a master's degree is a good thing. And he looked back at me, and I'll never forget these words. Tommy, you do not need another journalism degree. You have a journalism degree. He said, tell me, what is it that you hope to do with your life? And I said, well, Mr. Anderson, one day I would really like a job like yours. Now, I think back, that took a lot of brashness to say to the publisher of the paper, but I had seen him drive in his Cadillac. I had seen him with a private elevator up to his office. I had seen him get on his helicopter and go over to his place at Lake Sinclair. I had seen sort of the other side of the track in a way. And I just thought, well, maybe rather than just settling to being the editor of the paper, so he looked back at me. He said, if that is your goal, to become a publisher one day, and this again, saying this to a college senior. He said, if you can get into Harvard Business School, I will pay your way. He didn't say Stanford Business School, he didn't say University of Georgia. He said, I always dreamed, meaning Peyton, of going to Harvard Business School. And I said, well, I never even thought about it. And he described briefly why he thought that you need both the business side experience as well as the news side experience if you really want to rise in the profession. So I applied late to Harvard Business School with fabulous letters from Bill Ott and Jim Chapman and Peyton Anderson and others, and I was accepted after the deadline at Harvard Business School for the class beginning in 1963, finishing in 65.
Yeah, while so all this time you were still commuting back and forth to Macon. You were involved at the University of Georgia in everything, I think. I have a list: Gridiron, Biff Tad, Greek Horseman, Blue Key, ODK, Phi Kappa Phi, Phi Eta Sigma, Sigma Delta Chi, Sphinx. Where did you find the time?
I loved what I was doing. I never even thought about, not getting up in the morning and getting out on the ROTC drill field. So I think 7 a.m. I knew I was missing some real fun getting in my car, driving down to Macon, but I was excited about getting into that newsroom by 3 o'clock. I needed to be there by 3. So I had to build my classes around getting able to be there by 3 and then working the weekends. I sometimes took my then girlfriend, Edwina Chastain, with me a few times to Macon. Unfortunately, she never liked Macon. Maybe the only city in the world that we've lived in she didn't like, mostly because there was an effluent coming off the paper mill there that was not great. And Macon can be really hot in the summer, really hot, particularly if you don't have an air-conditioned house, which we didn't. But I guess, as I look back at those activities and things, many of them were, you don't apply for any of those. I have one regret. I think it was a botany class that kept me from being Phi Beta Kappa. I made Phi Kappa Phi, I guess. But I remember most all the tests were true or false or fill in the blanks. So I should have done really well on it. But I would have liked. That was probably the only goal that I set for myself. But I also learned later you can't do it all. I also learned I was rapidly becoming something that I do not recommend for anybody. I was rapidly becoming a workaholic. Somehow this fire had ignited within me in the 9th grade, and it almost like the flame grew stronger and stronger and stronger as I went to the University of Georgia and to Harvard Business School and beyond. It was like I was becoming something that today I urge everybody to avoid. I think you must have a balanced life, and I was putting so much of my time and effort into work. I was ignoring play, and play was almost a word that would bring me a sense of guilt. I don't have time to play. Play is not productive. Play is whatever. And I must tell you, I give almost lectures today to young students and tell them, because I burned out twice, and I'm convinced that I drove myself by keeping the pedal to the metal. I drove myself into those two burnouts. But I love Georgia. I love the activities there. I love the way in which, getting elected Secretary of Treasury of the class, getting elected the head of my fraternity, Sigma Nu, getting a chance to become a battalion commander in the ROTC unit. And there's also a story of how I was getting ready to go to Vietnam, but got injured at Fort Benning, because I was a distinguished military graduate, and I was a cadet lieutenant colonel, and I had all of the best awards that you can get of ROTC, and I had this feeling of patriotic duty to go and serve, as a lot of Southern boys did at the time.
The Red and Black, I guess, at that time was a different paper from what it is today. What were some of the other things that the Red and Black did that we don't see in student newspapers anymore?
Well, even though it was under the supervision of the College of Journalism, and Dan Kitchens was sort of assigned to us as advisor, we had unbelievable freedom. I went and reported on the state of married housing. Married housing had rats and bug infestations, and the married housing was unbelievable. And that created a firestorm in administrative office. I reported on the absolute number of potholes there were around the campus. Huge potholes that had not been filled on it. But we were digging in on all kind of investigative pieces, and nobody, as far as I know, out of the president's office or Dean Drury's office, said you can't do that. We had tremendous. Now, I think Dan Kitchens took a lot of flack for us as the advisor, but not once. I served as reporter, managing editor, and business manager. And never was I told. And also, we were selling a lot of advertising at that point, and we were covering our expenses. Nobody was having to subsidize us. I was the business manager, so I knew how much. In fact, I was accused of putting too many ads in by the then editor of the paper, because we could sell to Foster's Jewelry and every single Yulee gun all of the advertisers, the drive-ins, the motion picture theaters, all ran. We were, in my opinion, we were a better paper than the Athens Banner Herald. I hate to say that, but I think at the time, in terms of campus news, doing as we should have been.
Were you weekly at the time, bi-weekly?
Weekly, and we went to bi-weekly.
Went to bi-weekly during your time there.
I actually believe we could have gotten to daily. But it would have strained the printing presses. It would have strained all of us. And I was going to bed at nights. Don Roundtree and I worked together, and I would go to bed at night, some nights at 2. I mean, we saw the sun come up several times, and then to go to class.
Do you remember your graduation day?
Not as well. I mean, all I remember is that
They say you never remember the speaker.
what I do remember, though, is my dad and my mother, my aunt, who was the only college-educated person in our family, Annie Ruth Brown Johnson, I guess, who had hauled me to Alexander II rather than going to Union School and making all the way through 7 years to pick me up and taking me home. So she thought I got a better education. She was a teacher in that school. But anyway, my grandfather, that aunt, my mother, and my father were there. And you talk about real pride. Because except for Annie Ruth, nobody else had ever gone to college, and it was really a major thing for them and for me. It's funny though, I still regret I didn't make Phi Beta Kappa. It's the only regret. And if I'd done, I forget how much, they told me if I went and talked to the teacher that he probably would adjust the grade if he knew that it might make the difference between. But, you know, as I look back, I'm not a Phi Beta Kappa kind of guy.
Well, that's that drive coming through again. You wanted all of that. I guess you had the same drive through Harvard because you had other opportunities coming on the tail of that.
Well, I've had some intense periods of my life. There was no period of my life that was more intense than my 2 years at Harvard Business School. It's the case method. And in any given day, you could be asked to start a single case for a single class in front of 90 classmates, led by a highly skilled professor, or no class for weeks. No start. You could go for weeks without ever being asked to start a case. Some days you might find yourself being asked to start 2 cases. And so you must be prepared. It was like you couldn't go to bed at night without being prepared to start those cases. Now, I had only a liberal arts background, journalism, English, political science, history. I had virtually no math, virtually no, just, some math, and I took French. Well, there was a lot of quantitative cases at Harvard Business School, and I'm sitting there with guys who are graduates of MIT and Caltech and Georgia Tech, several from Georgia Tech and University Tech. Well, anyway, this professor in his class called MERC, M-E-R-C, Management Economics Reporting Control, said, "Mr. Johnson, you really need to get caught up on this." He gave me 2 basic accounting and finance books, and he said, "You really need to study these and know what's in these books to be able to do well in this class and in these other quantitative." So, I mean, I was trying to catch up. I was not prepared on the financial side for Harvard Business School, but I could write. My roommate, and I had a roommate who was not Edwina for the first 4 months. My roommate was a guy from the University of Michigan, Merv Roberts. He knew everything quantitatively, and he could barely write his name. I knew nothing quantitatively. So the 2 of us worked together. I would help him write his cases that were required to be ready each Saturday. It's called WAC, Written Analysis of Cases, WACs. And he would help me on all these complicated financial issues. I survived. And I think I never would have made it had it not been for Merv helping me in those first 4 months. But it just changed my way of thinking so dramatically. In terms of doing the analysis of a situation, whether it's in a company or some of the courses were in human relations. Really do your analysis before you decide what course of action to take. Now that sounds fairly simple, but a lot of us make decisions just on our gut, sort of spontaneous decisions, whatever. Well, that was very, very helpful as a life lesson.
Mr. Anderson knew what he was talking about sending you there.
He did. He did, but it was intensely competitive. And the good news is that Edwina and I married at Christmas of 1963. And I say that I saved her from a career with Delta because she had become very interested in becoming a flight attendant and seeing the world, and I was convinced that I would lose her if that. So I had proposed in the business office of the Red and Black during my senior year with what she said was one of the most romantic proposals anybody could ever get. I said, "Don't you think it's time to go get the ring?" And that was my proposal. Don't you think it's time to go get the ring? It startled her. But anyway, we did get the ring at Mr. Foster. It was the beginning, like strapping on an added propulsion device. I had one of them, which was my University of Georgia education, and the education I'd received really in Macon and in those classes at Georgia. But strapping on a second propulsion device, which was a Harvard Business School degree and experience there. I mean, it was like having news and journalism over here and having business and over here, and that prepared me so well for the future, because when Otis Chandler started looking for who could be the publisher of the Dallas paper, or who become the publisher of the Los Angeles Times, or Ted Turner, who was going to be the chief executive officer of CNN, having those two sets of experiences, news, journalism on one side, and business on the other. Not many people had that, frankly. You'd either have people with all news backgrounds who become editors, or some, unfortunately, who had all accounting backgrounds and did not respect the newsroom.
So where did your White House fellowship come in here? Was it right here at the conclusion of your Harvard time?
I mentioned earlier Edwina didn't like Macon.
Yeah.
A woman friend of hers brought to her attention this item about the White House Fellows Program. Her husband, her name was Carol Wyman, and her husband, Bill Wyman, was going to apply for the White House Fellows Program. Just showed it to Edwina. It was a short 3 paragraphs about how President Johnson had announced the creation of a fellowship program that would bring to Washington for 1 year outstanding young men and women who could come there, learn about government, and then go back to their professions. And Edwina says, "You should apply for this." I looked at it, I talked to Bill. She was really pushing me without saying that one of her motivations was not going back to Macon, truthfully. I applied. I came through a regional panel here in Atlanta with people on that like Mills B. Lane and Ivan Allen and Richard Rich and Beaufort Jones, and I mean, just a tremendous group. And once again, I was recommended. There were several thousand people who applied. Several hundred went to regional panels: Boston, Washington, New York, Atlanta, LA, San Francisco. I was not their first choice. This is a regional panel. I was not their second choice. On their list, I only learned this later, from Peyton, I was the third person out of their group to being recommended to the national panel. A national panel then headed by David Rockefeller and had John Oakes, the editor of the New York Times, on it. I thought about it here. I was not the first choice, second choice in the 9th grade for the Macon paper, and I was not the first choice or second choice, but I was the only one to win the White House Fellowship of all the candidates in the southeastern United States, well, including Texas. And so I say to people, don't worry about being the third nominee for something. Just give it your best. Just give it your best. So I applied for the White House Fellows Program, walked into the White House in late August of 1965, was taken in to meet Bill Moyers, who had picked me of the 15 to work with him. Bill, age 31, White House press secretary. And he said, "Tom, delighted to have you here. I wanted you to meet some people here. Now again, I'm right off the streets of Macon, Georgia. I just finished the summer on the Telegraph. And so we walk down the hall, and we walk into this room, and there is this large, imposing President of the United States. I'm serious. I parked my car on the West Executive Avenue. I was cleared through Secret Service, met by Bill's secretary, Carol Welch, taken up to Bill's office where we met. Hadn't met him before. I've got no political background, no power, no whatever. He said, I'd like you to meet some of the people around here. And he walks me in to meet the President of the United States. I'm 23 years old. And I also will never forget what President Johnson said to me. He said, Tom, we don't have much experience with interns here in the White House, so we're just going to treat you like a full-time member of staff. And from that moment on, I was treated like a full-time member of staff, to such a point that I sometimes had to miss some of the educational programs that the White House Fellows had. I should also tell you that during my fellowship year, they just gave me opportunities to travel with the President on Air Force One, to work with the White House Press Corps, to write press releases, to work with the photographers, White House photographers, and out of that, I'll never forget that Helen Thomas told me, she said, I've got one suggestion. Tell the truth. She said, if you tell the truth, you'll do just fine. And it was almost like Sam Glassman telling me, get it right. Those little nuggets that you never forget. I'll also never forget that I wanted to take my class of White House Fellows to my home state of Georgia. We had a tour arranged so that the fellows would have a chance to go to the Space Center in Alabama. We visited several other places, but I was so proud that my group was going to go with me, and I'd have a chance to introduce them to some of my friends in Atlanta. There was this secretary who worked with me, and I said, find a place for us to meet. Again, 1965. So she made some calls, and you can imagine when they say the White House is calling, you can get through to anybody. So I mean, you know, she came in and said, Tom, there's a really interesting situation about Atlanta. I said, I can only find one place that will permit you to have your meeting. I said, that's really odd. I said, she said, yes. Said, I told them that, you know, the group included Army Major Ronald B. Lee, combat veteran of Vietnam, black. The only club in Atlanta in 1965 that would permit me to have a luncheon with a black White House fellow was the Commerce Club. And it is the only club to which I belong today. I will never forget that. But the Commerce Club had also been a pioneering club in the admission of Jews, the admission of blacks, and they're doing a 50th anniversary of the Commerce Club, and I've just told that story, and I even have a memo about that. But I thought about 1965 and how the world has changed. But the White House Fellows Program opened up the world for me like nothing else. It enabled me to meet people all over the world, to travel the world, to become friends with people at all kind of levels. And among my best friends were the Secret Service agents. I got to be really close to the Secret Service agents. Because we were all out advancing trips, we always said President Johnson was an equal opportunity abuser. He would give us all hell. I mean, if he needed a rock picked up in front of the car on the ranch, he would either ask the Secret Service guys or me to go pick up the rock and get it out of the path. But there was one of the Secret Service agents was from Macon, Georgia, Rufus Youngblood. He is the agent that threw himself on top of President Johnson in Dallas after the shots were heard and a few cars ahead. He threw this large Vice President of the United States to the floor of the car and jumped on top of him, and not knowing what was happening next or whatever. But in any case, I developed this lifetime respect for these guys. Why? First of all, almost all of them college educated, in great health, men of integrity and honesty, but every one of them is prepared to step in front of the bullet, to take the bullet. And you think about that, how many people have jobs where every morning they walk out the door and their wives or their families know that their husbands or fathers have been trained to take the bullet, just like that agent did who tried to protect President Reagan out front of the hotel in Washington a few years ago. And I am one of the few honorary members, I mean really few honorary members of the Association of Retired Secret Service Women today. But that's the kind of friendships you make. You say, well, you become friends with Mrs. Johnson and President Johnson and Dean Rusk, and you get to know Dick Helms of the CIA and all. But the real people were people like that.
Some could say that press secretaries figuratively have to be ready to step in front for their president.
Yeah, but those bullets are not real.
But the Secret Service does it for real.
No. I had to step in front, take a lot of bullets. But the nice thing about it, when I would do the briefing, Bill Moyers would do the briefing at 10, and later George Christian, the morning briefing. And then there was an afternoon briefing then, particularly for the AM cycle papers. The morning was for the whole day and for the networks and everything to be prepared. When they shoved me out, and I said, I don't know, the press corps believed them.
Plausible deniability.
But what was also interesting is President Johnson had me in his most secret meetings as the note taker of the Tuesday lunch meetings later. I mean, I literally got the clearances with the same clearances of the President of the United States, and had there been a nuclear threat where we had to go off to one of the destinations that are the shelters, I was one of those that would be going with him. And I had some incredible experiences. I handed him the note that said that Dr. Martin Luther King had been shot in Memphis. Sitting in the room with him was the former Georgia Governor Carl Sanders and the then chairman of Coca-Cola, Mr. Robert Woodruff. Mr. Woodruff went over to a phone. I took the notes after President Johnson was calling the FBI, and he called Ivan Allen here in Atlanta, and he said, Ivan, do whatever it takes today to keep Atlanta from burning. Well, added police, added fire, because that night, as you remember, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, Los Angeles, many cities burned that night. Atlanta did not.
I don't want to skip one part. I know that at the conclusion of your fellowship, when Mr. Moyers and the president decided they needed you to stay, you had a moment of conscience, a moment of duty.
I told them that I could not stay. President Johnson and Bill asked me to stay, and I said I have a moral obligation to return. Peyton Anderson has sent me through the University of Georgia, sent me to Harvard Business School, has hopes for me to really develop as an executive in the paper. And that was when, to my astonishment, President Johnson wrote a 2-page letter to Peyton Anderson that his last sentence was, I need Tom Johnson, can you spare him? I mean, and Peyton wrote back to me and to President Johnson and said, I don't know how you can turn down a President of the United States. He also said, and by the way, what's the status of that judge? And he had a judge he was recommending for appointment, or somebody appointed to a judgeship. And Peyton was beginning to see the possibility of a little horse trading there, maybe to get President Johnson to appoint this guy as a judge in return for my being permitted to stay.
There's a picture you talk about, and we could go for an hour just simply on your experiences in the White House, and we don't have that time. But there's a picture you shared that shows you in front of Mr. Kosygin and Secretary Rusk and the leaders of the world.
Yeah.
And Mr. Johnson has you by the coat collar, and he's
picking me up.
He's reading you a riot act of some kind. What was going on there?
That is a photo of all the hundreds of photos that I have that I keep, And I show it to people occasionally. I say that there's a great difference in life between perception and reality. This photo has me being held by, so I pull close to President Johnson with his right arm and on my lapel, and some of the reporters and even some of the cut lines on the photo said, President Johnson interrupts Glassboro summit with Premier Kosygin to confer with key aide Tom Johnson. That was what my mother read. That's what my friends at the University of Georgia read. That's what went out. You know, here I am giving President Johnson advice on how to deal with the, you know, the problems between the United States and the Soviet Union. Well, in fact, President Johnson had brought Kosygin out. There were all the leaders of the United States, foreign policy, Dean Rusk, Robert McNamara. They were the leaders of the Soviet Union from Kosygin and Gromyko and others. But out front of this news conference were at least 100 photographers and reporters, many of whom were setting off their flashes, hitting their shutters. And in those days, the old 16 millimeter film, those cameras also put off a little bit of a roar, unlike this one. Anyway, he pulled me over and he said, Tom, if you don't get the goddamn photographers to stop shooting, I'm going to take him back inside. Now again, so I go out there to all the photographers and I said, guys, if you don't stop shooting, there's going to be no news conference. So almost everybody stopped there. You know, we use the word shooting. There probably should be a better word than that because it implies something differently. But they did. I finally got quiet, and he went back to his news conference, and the rest is history.
Now, in the spring of '68, President Johnson announced, "I shall not seek nor will I accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president." I believe those were his words. May have been your words. I don't know. But what did that do to your future at that point when he decided he was not running for another term?
March 31st, 1968. To the shock, I think, of the Democratic Party, the nation, to most of his staff, he announced he would not seek another term. I had worked on a concluding set of paragraphs for him to deliver at the State of the Union address earlier that year with the same announcement. He had it in his inside pocket as he drove up to Capitol Hill that night as the ending for his State of the Union. Between the time he left the White House and the time he got to the Capitol, he decided he couldn't do it then, because he was asking the Congress to approve several new pieces of legislation, and he would not be effective as a lame duck, so he held off. He had consulted with very few people, and he did not consult with me. I knew of it because I was asked to type it. I mean, I try to tell people some of my roles. I had helped to write the one in January. But on this one, I was type it before it went to the teleprompter operator. And no more than a dozen people in that White House probably knew that he was going to do that. Mrs. Johnson knew, and George Christian knew, and a few others. But in any case, to answer your question, it meant that I had to get ready to go back to Macon. I was then finally going to be free, so I could go back to Macon and get on track to maybe one day, if I was lucky, become the editor or the publisher of the Macon paper.
But instead, the president asked you to go with him.
He did. That was an even tougher decision.
Tell me about that.
Many of his most loyal aides were taking these mega buck jobs. Jack Bellini to the Motion Picture Association of America, Marvin Watson to Occidental Petroleum, Jim Jones to a major law firm, George Christian, Bill Moyers had already left to become publisher of Newsday. And I must tell you, he just worked a piece of me that I have probably the ultimate vulnerability on, and that's loyalty. But it was like I had two intensely loyal mentors. And he said, if you will just do it during the transition to get me back to Texas, for this office of the former president, and he had this secretary named Marie Famer who came to me and said, Tom, you just must do this. All of the rest of them are leaving him, them being the other aides. And Edwin and I talked, and let me tell you, the hardest call I ever had to make was to call Peyton Anderson and tell him that I was going with President Johnson for an interim period of time. And he was really disappointed, and it wasn't long after that he sold the papers to Knight Ridder.
You went to Austin with the president. You had some years, I believe, in his, I don't know the exact period.
I worked for him for 4 years in Texas until I announced his death.
And you arranged his funeral.
I arranged the funeral. I literally dressed him.
You were close to Mrs. Johnson.
Very close to Mrs. Johnson. And I'd become like a brother to Linda and Lucy. They had no brother. Mrs. Johnson said that I was the son that Lyndon had never had. He had also, I think, said that about Bill Moyers, but Bill had left. So I was really close.
You went on then into their family business?
Yes, I went on to become the executive vice president of all their family businesses. Muzak, photo processing, KTBC television, AM, FM, ranching. I was even the president of Comanche Cattle Company. I knew nothing about cattle, but I was told with him standing there that I needed to learn to pregnancy test a cow. Now I know he did that so that he could tell the world that I taught Tom to pregnancy test a cow, but if you've never reached in to try to find something that feels just like, almost like an egg shell or something to pregnancy test a cow, you haven't lived. I mean, and I've looked back and I was amazed at the various things that he taught me to do during that period of time. He was a worker all the way through. I've never known a man to work like he would get up early, work until about 1 o'clock, have lunch, take a nap, go back to work, and work from maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock to 11 at night. He put in 2 days every day. And that was true when I was in the White House. That was true. I mean, he didn't stop. The ranch just became like another, and it became just almost like another White House in a way. I mean, he was out there helping to lay the aluminum pipes for irrigation. He was commanding his ranch foreman like he was commanding the Pentagon. He was out buying. He would buy these $25,000 bulls to mate with cattle that we had down in Mexico at a ranch in Mexico. He said, Tom, look at this now as a lesson. It said, those cows, whatever you call a woman cow, those cows, they look pretty pathetic. They haven't been fed, they haven't been treated properly, but you mate them with a great bull and they turn out these beautiful, beautiful calves. And they did. They turned out these beautiful calves. I don't know what the lesson out of that was, but it was unbelievable, some of the things that I learned from him. But again, hard work. He was a worker. You may disagree with him, but I tell you, he tried his best with his Great Society programs to make this world a better place, with the Medicare, with public broadcasting, with Job Corps, Head Start, with those civil rights bills where he had to overpower his old friend Richard Russell to pass those. But Vietnam so overshadowed it. But even there, he felt that the people of South Vietnam had a right to live free from communism and free from aggression. He went to his grave believing we'd signed a treaty with South Vietnam, and I talked a lot more with him when we got back into Texas about a lot of these things than I probably had been able to in the White House.
Well, as part of your duties with the the Johnson family businesses, you had to divest, I believe, some broadcast stations, and
Yeah.
you came in touch with your future employer. Tell us
Yes.
about that.
Yes. The Federal Communications Commission said that the LBJ family could not continue to own both the cable television system in Austin, Texas, and the CBS television affiliate. They considered that cross ownership. And even though in several markets, newspapers had been able to continue to hold television stations, they had been grandfathered in. They just felt that was too much of a concentration. The decision was to sell the CBS television station. I would have thought they would have sold the cable system, but they didn't. The then Times Mirror Company of Los Angeles was one of those companies, the owners of the Los Angeles Times, and by then the Dallas Times Herald, showed great interest in acquiring this property. It was the dominant station in Austin, Texas, the state capital of Texas, owned by the Johnson family. But this strikingly handsome Otis Chandler came in with a team of his very, very top executives to evaluate the property. And I was asked to basically, as the gopher, although my title was executive vice president, to show them around the station, to show them around Austin. And eventually they made the best offer to buy the TV station, and the announcement was made. President and Mrs. Johnson invited all of the community leaders from Austin that they could get, political leaders and business leaders and others, to a reception for Otis Chandler in order to welcome them to Austin. My job was to stand behind President Ms. Johnson and Otis Chandler. There were three people in the receiving line. And I don't really say this to brag. I say it, I think, because it's a lost, it's a lost quality of mine. But every time I try to answer this question, it sort of seems like it comes out wrong. But there were probably 200 people in that receiving line, couples names, and I introduced each one of them by name and with something about each of them. I mean, I had always had this great capacity with names and identification. I have a technique that I have used that has helped me with that. So in that case, I was flawless. I introduced Mr. Chandler. This is Roy Butler. Roy is the former mayor of Austin. He owns the largest car dealership here in Austin. He also owns the Coors distributorship, both his automotive dealership, which is Lincoln Mercury, and his Coors dealership are major advertisers of our station. And just did that all the way through. Apparently on the plane going back that night, Otis said to all the guys, he said, "Have you ever seen anything like in your life?" And they said, no, they've never seen anything like that in their life. They've never seen anybody being able to not only introduce by name, usually husband and wife, because I'd gotten to know them through all kind of connections there, but something about each one of them. And I later learned they also had looked at, the car that I was driving was a car that President Johnson had given to Edwina, but I had one of the tapes in that 8-track, and I can't remember whether it was Tchaikovsky or one of the classical. Edwina loves classical music. This house just sort of reeks with classical sounds of music almost, but she loves it. But anyway, they said, "Gosh, you notice that he has a great interest in classical music?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, the Chandlers had been the leaders in Los Angeles of the culture. Mrs. Chandler had built the music center and everything else. Well, in any case, Otis, just within 2 weeks, said, "We want you to be the president of this television station for us until the Federal Communications Commission approves the transfer of the license." There's this license transfer period on our behalf. And then we will talk to you about your career. And I said, "Well, Mr. Chandler, I want to get back to my profession." I said, "As much as I love television and I really want to get back to my career eventually, and I'm planning to go back to Macon up to night Ritter. Seriously, I have a letter to him. He said, well, I won't think about that. So he came back and said, we'd like for you to stay here for the license transfer period, sort of get us acclimated in Austin, and then we'd like you to go to Dallas as the editor of the Dallas paper. You know, I'm thinking I'm going back to Macon maybe as some junior assistant to the publisher maybe, or maybe, you know, I'm serious. I was thinking I didn't know quite, but I've been offered the job of editor of the Dallas Times Herald, which was the 10th largest paper in America at that time. Very successful paper, the afternoon paper, unfortunately, but very successful then. Anyway, it didn't take long to decide, particularly since Peyton had sold the Macon paper to Knight Ridder,
Right.
and I was going back to a different environment. But I accepted that offer.
And things went well at the Dallas Times
It was
Herald.
a boom time in Dallas.
Yeah.
The market was booming, the paper was booming. Time magazine named us one of the 5 best papers in the South. We for a short period of time went ahead of the Dallas Morning News. So Otis comes down. First of all, he promotes me within 2 years from editor to publisher. Then 2 years, and you know, and we are really booming. I'm liking it. He comes down to flies in to see me at Edwina at dinner. Edwina has gone out to pick up a choice steak and cooked it. And I can tell you, Otis Chandler was like an Olympic shot putter. You're talking about an athlete of almost Olympian proportions. He could not cut the steak. It became like a joke. Edwina had overcooked what already must have been a tough steak. But we're just there, just the 3 of us now. Here's the chairman of the board, this legendary man who's there, and he's there to talk about coming. Now, this is not an exaggeration. Edwina will tell you. He was trying to cut the steak in it, and it would not cut. I mean, it was tough as, you know, leather. It was like a leather couch almost. But it didn't seem to affect Otis. He told me, he said, I want you to come to Los Angeles as president of the LA Times. And he said, if you do as I think you will do, and he said, I don't ever want this known to anybody else, but he said, if you do as well as I think you'll do, you'll be considered to succeed me as publisher.
So off to Los Angeles.
1977, we went to Dallas in 73, left in 77. Meanwhile, you know, we've got these children by now. We've got a son, Wyatt, we've got a daughter, Krista, and Wyatt didn't want to leave. He had all of his life together there. He was 12 years old, and soccer team and science club and all the things that he liked. It was traumatic in a way, but I should tell you, every move we've made, Edwina just loved it, and made it where, you know, for Edwina, life is an adventure.
But she married you because she wanted to live in Georgia. She wanted a Georgia
did not want to date anybody who lived outside of Georgia. She said, I won't date anybody who lives outside of Georgia. And she will even say to you now that she, as she looked back, she's wondered whether she could have just stayed there and I could move her back to Athens in a way, but she loved every place we went. And I tell you, for a girl who at one point was in a house up near LJ that had no inside plumbing, said the only time she ever saw her mother really, really cry was when they got into this house and it had no indoor plumbing, they had outdoor plumbing. Now her father, Hoyt Chastain, who became a district agent, county agent, district agent for the University of Georgia, he of course built them eventually on it. But I remind her occasionally, as you look at this collection around this house or look at whatever, I remind her occasionally, you know, not to forget those early days, and she hasn't. I think she's enjoyed the ride, and certainly she has made the ride work for me with both our son and our daughter, and for me, she's just made every part of our lives an adventure. I mean, it's been. She doesn't meet a stranger. We've had people stay in our homes that she's met. She's picked up somewhere people that needed to come and stay temporarily with us. It's really been a fascinating relationship for 46 years.
Well, in Los Angeles, your climb continued. You eventually rose to publisher. You were there through the 80s.
Yes, I was named publisher in 19. I was named president of the Times in 1977. I was named publisher and the first non-chandler in 1980, and served in that position until 1990. The winds of change had begun to blow, though, within the family. Otis and I were considered liberals by the family. Now you got the non-Otis branch of the family contained people who had been members of the John Birch Society. I mean, they were that far over, and they did not like the very independent and some would say liberal editorial pages of the Los Angeles Times. They did not like it when Otis commissioned a major series on the John Birch Society. One of his first assignments was the impact of the John Birch Society. Remember, they had the billboards impeach Earl Warren and all this sort of stuff. Well, they were his family members. But over time, the political forces of the non-Otis branches of the family eventually pushed Otis and me out.
Thinking of those years in both Dallas and Los Angeles and what it was like to run a newspaper then, when you look at the newspaper business today, did you see any of that coming, of the changes in the newspaper business?
I never saw the changes coming that exist today. And I also believe that newspaper publishers and television station owners, were so successful, highly profitable, barons in their own communities, television stations. We had a TV station, KDFW in Dallas, that had 70% profit margin. That meant that 70 cents out of every dollar went to operating profit. We weren't investing enough in new technology. Although at the LA Times we had several experiments, and we weren't investing. At one point, the Times Mirror Company had the opportunity to buy for $300 million, 50% of Ted Turner's company, which at one point sold for over $12 billion, I think. But they thought Ted was crazy. Including Otis and a man named Dow Carpenter. But we had an opportunity. Ted was in deep trouble. He'd overextended with the purchase of a television, of a film studio. But I just think the very success of those years blinded many of the publishers and owners to the future. There were very few. Don Graham at the Washington Post, the Grahams came to Atlanta and bought Kaplan, this very successful educational training program. And some of the others invested in television and in cable, but they weren't making the investments. They were investing in these huge printing presses and buying hundreds of thousands of tons of newsprint and turning out print.
Today you can't get the Atlanta paper in Athens.
No. And you get a very thin AJC even in Atlanta.
So you were a vice chairman at the Times Mirror Company after that last transition, and the opportunity came to come back to Atlanta. Tell us about that.
I had always wanted to come home. When I tell people that, they sort of shake their head. But when I wanted to come home at some point, Jack Tarver at one point had offered me the job to succeed Reg Murphy as the editor of the editor. He had really been editor of the editorial pages, but he offered me this tremendous salary that was half of what I was making at the Dallas paper. And I always kidded Jack about that. J.B. Fuqua had asked me to come back twice in very important positions. I think he wouldn't object to me saying now the president of Fuqua Industries. But with the exception of some television stations, I didn't know anything about all the properties that JB had. In any case, a very good friend of mine, Jerry Lindauer of Austin, Texas, who had been head of the National Cable Television Association, was also a very, very good friend of Ted's. He knew that Ted was looking for a new chief executive, a new president of CNN. He also knew that I had to get out of California, get out of that job. I mean, the right-wing elements of the paper wanted to change direction. They had already elevated me out of it. I tell people, and one day I'm responsible for 12,000 people. I'm in charge overseeing our properties in Denver, Dallas, and Los Angeles. And after this, I'm vice chairman of it, and I've got a driver, a car, and a secretary, and a beautiful office, and a huge compensation package. I mean, but I wasn't happy. Yeah. I wasn't happy. I never worked for the money. I never worked for the money. But Ted offered me the job of president of CNN. And I called several people, though. I called J.B. Fuqua. I called Roberto Goizueta. I called President Carter. I went and talked with Jane Fonda. I'll never forget, Jane and Ted were dating. And I said, tell me about Ted Turner. And she said, Tom, he's the most remarkable man I have ever known in my life. Others thought I probably wouldn't last. Here, I'm a conventional, probably old media type, many would describe as traditional media type. And I'm joining this guy who's absolutely the total frontier. I mean, he is out in orbit in new technology and in global television, and it's amazing how well it worked. Ted's the only genius I've ever met, and I've only used that word to describe one person in my lifetime, and that's Ted Turner. It's as though Ted has a extra lobe out of which come these original thoughts. I think of a genius as somebody who's an original thinker, like we all studied about, the great original thinkers in ancient history. But Ted has just these unbelievably original thoughts. You just can't figure out where they originated. Now, not all of them made sense, but many of them were just way out. Creation of, not just CNN and the airport channel and the creation of all of these things, but just seeing the future and then willing to put in his entire stack. At one point, of course, I guess he got his debt up to $2 billion because he was able to get, the Japanese and Mike Milken with junk bonds and others to just sort of believe in him. The Atlanta bankers didn't believe in him, wouldn't loan him a penny. Many of the New York bankers, but his vision. But he also, I've never known anybody, and this includes presidents, that wanted to leave the world a better place as much as he did. I mean, $1 billion to the United Nations. All of his environmental programs, his buying up, he owns more land than any American, except the United States government. And he's putting those into just the most incredibly environmentally friendly, taking off the developments on those properties and things that weren't indigenous, putting back the indigenous animals like the bison and the wolves, and taking down the fences. But he's going to leave to the world some stretches of land like it was when the Native Americans occupied it. Vast amounts for hopefully the enjoyment and the recreation and realize that, and going to people like Warren Buffett and Gates and saying, come on guys, let's give the money now. Why wait until after you're gone, have some foundation like Ford or Rockefeller? Let's do it now. And almost shaming them. And they are now giving. I mean, many of them are now really giving. Of course, Gates is doing fantastically around the world. But the guy just he will literally cry when he sees something that's wrong, somebody that's hurt, somebody that needs help, something to do. But he continues. He's got a new solar project he's now doing with Southern Company. Gigantic. So he's staying out there, way out there. Well, I mean, I had a lot of favorite stories, but one of them is, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. we have to prepare for the potential of war. Although Jim Baker and the Iraqi foreign minister, I think I'd ever forget his name, but
Aziz?
Yeah, Tariq Aziz. We're negotiating. But I went up to Ted, I said, Ted, we've got to plan for a war. Oh, God, pal, why? I said, there either's going to be a peace or a war, but I think we've got to plan for a war. And I said, if we want to own this story, do it the best job. Something you told me you wanted us to be the best network on the planet. I asked him only one question when he interviewed me. I said, Ted, tell me what it is you want of the next president of CNN. He said, I want it to be the best news network on the planet. And I said, what else? He said, that's it, pal. So I said, you told me that. And I said, this is a chance. And I said, for us to do that, we either have to spend $5 million over budget more, or maybe as much as $35 million over budget to put in the ground stations, to lease the transponders, to put people into Baghdad and Amman and Tel Aviv and Cairo and out in the Saudi desert. And I said, tell me what I am authorized to spend. I'm the new head of CNN. He looked back at me and he said, you spend whatever you think it takes, pal. And that was it. I walked down the hall. I had Ed Turner with me, the then editor of CNN. I said, God, I thought Otis Chandler might have been the best news guy I'd ever worked for in life. I've just met the most extraordinary owner or leader of anything. So I went back and, we not only did we spend, I think it was $22 million to get prepared, and we owned the story, but we built customers and I cannot tell you how many thousands of new customers. We had cable operators, broadcasters, hotels, all over the world, and they stayed with us after the war was over. So that investment paid off multiple times in it. But again, the point is, Ted said, you spend whatever it takes, pal.
And the day after you arrived, Iraq invaded Kuwait.
The day after I arrived, Saddam invaded Kuwait. And I must tell you, there were two personalities that helped to make my career at CNN. Saddam Hussein, and the tremendous global coverage we got, the exclusive coverage when John Holliman of the University of Georgia, Peter Arnett, and Bernie Shaw are there as in an exclusive as the bombs were falling within 100 yards of their hotel. Saddam, it proved that I knew what I was doing too. I knew news values. I knew how to contact people. I knew how to get Colin Powell on the phone, and the CIA director on the phone, and others on the phone. I had a niche that really worked, but I also had to rely on people that knew television. I said on my first day, guys, I know journalism, but primarily print journalism. You know journalism, primarily television journalism. I'm going to rely on you to do what you do best, and I'm going to try to support you with what I do best. I said, don't even think that I know what you know about the technology, and I don't even know what an uplink is. They look at me like I'm, from a different planet. Anyway, the other person that made my career was O.J. Simpson. Our audience levels had begun going down, and I was in trouble. I didn't know what to do. This is before Fox News, but anyway, OJ gets on that freeway, and after that, our audience levels again just go through the roof. Our covering the O.J. Simpson story was so profound, we would try to shift out of the trial over to some other news, and we'd have a meltdown on our phones. The people were so engrossed, locked to that story. But anyway, I love working for Ted for 11 years. I love working for him for 11 years. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed working with him.
After, what has followed that? How are you spending your time now?
Well, now we have ignored a huge piece of my life.
Let's don't miss it.
Which is that I was hit by depression in my mid-40s at the LA Times. I attribute a great deal of that not simply to keeping this workaholic schedule and working myself into it, but also the struggle against the other members of the family, where Otis and I were striving to keep that newspaper and that company independent, where we were striving to continue with the qualities that we had really established, and we were on our way to making the Los Angeles Times as good as the New York Times. Everybody was already saying it's one of the 3 best papers in America: New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. But my having that job removed from me removed my self-worth. It took away and I, as I now look back, I mean, I say to people, you are more than a title, you are more than a position, you are many other things. You're a father, you're a husband, you're a member of your community, you're a good guy in a whole variety of ways. But I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I had wrapped so much of my self-worth into that position. Maybe it went all the way back to my childhood, wanting to make it. And I had sort of made it to the ultimate in many ways when I, risen to that job at the Los Angeles Times. But anyway, it went off, just forced me to go and get therapy. I started a series of beginning with lithium and going through other medications. But I really only started to come out of it in a huge way when I got here to Atlanta. CNN was a great new opportunity. I had a spectacular new physician, Dr. Charles Nemiroff at Emory. He put me on a new medication that worked. And I don't know how much of it was the new medication and how much was the new opportunity, but the combination of the two just enabled me to get back in a significant way. I retired in 2001, even though I had an opportunity for a new three-year contract. It was wonderful because I saw another I saw another burnout coming. I had 24-hour news, 7 days a week, traveling the world, some days going in and leaving that day for Moscow or Beijing or someplace. And you can love things too much too. I mean, basketball players may love basketball, but they can't play it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without burning out. And I was doing it. So what am I doing now? I work a great deal in the field of mental health. I meet regularly with people who would like to come to me and talk with me about their depression. I'm doing all I know how to do to eliminate the stigma, the terrible, terrible stigma that is attached to mental health. People say, well, what do you mean by that? If it is known that you have a mental health problem, it can be used against you in the workplace. It can be used against you in government. For example, you, Tom, are coming up in the hierarchy at the University of Georgia, but somebody learns that you have depression, and they say to Mike Adams, well, you do know Tom has a mental health problem. It can clobber a career, and that's wrong. We should think of it like a broken arm, a broken leg. It's treatable. You can deal successfully with depression. Art Buchwald did, Mike Wallace did, William Styron did, J.B. Fuqua did. I have. With the right diagnosis and treatment, you can deal successfully with depression. And I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my money and a lot helping people who have it. I do say, though, if it's going to cost you your progression in the company or in the government and whatever, keep it private. They will say to me, oh, but Mr. Johnson, I'm in a highly classified job in the government, and each year I have to fill in this form that says, have you ever taken a mood-altering drug? I say you have two choices. You can put NA there, which is I'm not answering, or you can write down, yes, I take Effexor or Paxil or Prozac or whatever for my, but frankly, that's really risky. Until we get people educated about this particular illness better than they are today. I would like the pilot of my plane to be taking an antidepressant if he's depressed. I would like the people in the CIA or at the Pentagon who are leading us on major decisions not to be hiding it or not going to see a psychiatrist or a doctor to get treated. Why should we treat mental illness any different than physical illness? After all, the brain is the most important part of our physiology. So I work a great deal on that. I have served on the board of the Mayo Clinic for 12 years. I'm now on the board of MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston because I care a great deal about trying to help other people. Edwina and I have been blessed with resources. We are giving back those resources, as much of it privately and secretly as we can, to help people to have opportunities like I've had.
You also take a great joy in your family these days. It's quite apparent from the photographs around the house.
I do.
You have grandchildren?
There's nothing that brings me more laughter than two little girls that are our granddaughters. They're now ages 8 and 9. They're totally loaded with mischief, but they're also loaded with a lot of interesting thoughts. I am talking with the 8-year-old, and I said, Julene, I plan to live at least until you're 20. I want to see you go through grammar school and high school. I'm planning to buy you your first car. I've told that to her sister. And you know, who knows, by 20 you may have met the right guy. Our daughter's sort of standing outside the room, and she looks back at me and she says, Grandy, you won't. And I said, what do you mean I won't? She said, because you will be dead. And I said, gosh. But then she looked back at me and said, but Grandy, I will really miss you. And so I just have tears coming down my cheek. I mean, so things that these little girls say or do, but they're just always into mischief. And, you know, among the great regrets of my life is that I did not take the time with young Wyatt Johnson and Krista Johnson that I've taken with Bryn and Julene. And again, among my life lessons is not to give the time and attention and love to your children. You, to some extent, were part of this generation of ours that was sort of, you go out the door early in the morning, you come home sometime late at night, you're so focused on your work, trying to make it, that you don't realize that the most important work you do is not in the White House, but in your own house. And I don't have many regrets, but boy, that's a big one. At about age 8 or 9, our daughter, Krista, who was a wonderful soccer player, I had missed, I don't know, maybe the 6th or 7th consecutive soccer game of hers. And I remember she came off the field, they had won, and I made it just in time to see the game end. And she put her little hand just on her side like this. She's no more than 8 or 9. She looked back at me and she said, don't forget that you're a daddy too. Now, just right, nobody prompted her. Don't forget that you're a daddy too. So I say to people who are the ages that, and I really do think that this new era of parenting, this new era of people is so much better now. I think the fathers now are putting more emphasis on their role as parents than we did. But none of us has ever tried to portray ourselves as perfect. It's just that was a giant imperfection.
One thing I saved to last, because we could use it as a device to wrap us up here, is that during that time that you moved from Dallas to Los Angeles, I believe that very year, you were the president of the Georgia Alumni Society. Mm-hmm. And I think the youngest president. I believe you were about 30, early 30s at that time. Mm-hmm. Talk about that year and why it was important for you to be involved with that.
First, I was genuinely honored to to become the president of the University of Georgia Alumni Society. I mean, I love the university. The university meant so much to me. I mean, those 4 years were years where I had people who believed in me, faculty members, fraternity brothers, other students who were, electing me to all of these positions. So I mean, I felt like this was something I needed to do to give back to the university. I should tell you there could have been a better year than that because I had to commute. I can't remember how many times I had to fly back and forth between Dallas and I was trying to think the other day, was it Dallas or was it Los Angeles? I guess it's Dallas. Between Dallas and Atlanta, and then get a car and drive over.
But you were working with folks like President Fred Davison at the time.
Yes.
I believe Bob Argo was very involved.
Yes, very much so. But I just have always felt that a great university has a really strong alumni. I mean, you can't have one without the other. That we not only need to support it financially, but need to support it with our participation, with our our giving back to it. So I mean, I enjoyed the year. I enjoyed the opportunity. I enjoyed being consulted about policy matters. I had thoughts on things that were interesting. I know I was involved in helping to get Coca-Cola to take the Peabodys to an entire new level with their financial support in New York. It was just a tangential thing because I've stayed much closer to the Grady College and have headed their advisory board and served on the Peabody board and other things there. But I think we all have a responsibility to the university, and I say it in a totally genuine way. I don't know that I've ever accepted the opportunity to come and sit in the president's box, but I mean, like so many people see these as opportunities to sort of, get things for themselves. I've always just seen that, it's a chance to give back to the university, and I've just been delighted to see the continued sort of the trajectory. Mike Adams and I may have had our differences on things, but we haven't differed on the quality of the University of Georgia, the ambitions to make it one of the absolute best universities in the country. I mean, it makes my degree of greater value as did it. I'm also convinced that I could never get it admitted today with the new standards of it.
I'm quite sure you would have met the standards, whatever they were. We want to thank you for your time today.
Well,
this has been a great pleasure to have you tell your story.
Well, and thank you both for all that you're doing, all three of you, for this project and for all of us who are graduates of the university. I've enjoyed it.